Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayom Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Sotara Satashi Shrimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sakho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai, Ganga Mai Ki Jai, Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Garanga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita Volume 2. We're now on the chapter entitled Free to Preach. Satsru Maharaj, in the previous chapter, he segregated, because the name of the chapter was, It Will Not Be Possible to Assist You. So he pinpointed all of the setbacks and the disappointments that Srila Prabhupada experienced at that time, going chronologically. And now, in this chapter, as we're reading through, entitled Free to Preach, Satsru Maharaj is going not so chronologically, but he's showing how, in this segment of Prabhupada's attempts to preach in the Western countries, he's meeting with success after much disappointment. And these successes, they're long range. He might have met the people in February, and now in March, April, there's some result. He's willing to take the chances to move out of the comfort of Dr. Mishra's his support, and with his own hard labor of distributing books, and whatever small donations he was getting from the students who were attending his classes, he decided to maintain himself below poverty level. Srila Prabhupada, we can't understand how difficult it actually was for Srila Prabhupada. But at least now there's some success. So we'll continue with the reading. Now the constrained situations of Butler and the Anand Ashram and Dr. Mishra are behind him. He is free to speak about the absolute truth in full. Throughout his life, he had prepared for this, yet he is still discovering the best ways to present Krishna, exploring his Western audience, testing their reactions. So far, the only audiences that Srila Prabhupada had were in the very beginning at Butler, and that was the friends and neighbors of the Agarwals, who took Prabhupada just as something interesting, but nothing seriously was taken there. And then he had the opportunity to collect a small number of Dr. Mishra's students, but even they were not particularly interested or dedicated to what Prabhupada was teaching. For them, it was just something interesting for them to do. So here we have Prabhupada in these lectures, because Prabhupada moved into his new room, room 307, in February. And in March, he began his regular classes on the Bhagavad-Gita. And most of the people attending were from Dr. Mishra's classes, who he had met at Anand Ashram and at his yoga studio. He started with the second chapter, which we heard last week. And Prabhupada now, we went through the first class on March 2nd. And what Satsvarup Maharaj does is, he combines these classes, because some of them were cut off. Like this March 4th, we only get a half hour of it, because there was a break, whatever the reason was. Very interesting class. So Satsvarup Maharaj, he combines the two classes of March 2nd and March 4th into a very interesting presentation of how Prabhupada is trying to attract the interest of these few students who are attending his classes. So this is part of Prabhupada's lecture here. We should always remember that he is God. He is all-powerful. In strength, no one could conquer him. In beauty, as far as beauty is concerned, when he was on the battlefield, have any of you seen a picture of Krishna? Have you seen? Have any of you ever seen Krishna? Oh, no? So no one in the whole audience. So this is from Prabhupada's March 2nd class. And we had gone through March. So this is what Prabhupada says after this, although Satsvarup Maharaj doesn't put the whole thing, because he can, how much can he put into one book? So, have you seen any picture of Krishna? Oh, no. Of course. Any one of you have seen Krishna? Krishna, when he was present in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, at that time he was about 90 years old. 90 years old. He had his great-grandchildren. He married 16,000 wives, and each wife had 10 children. And those 10 children, they also got each 10, 12 children. And they had children also. Because he was at that time 90 years old, he got at that time great-grandchildren also. So his family was very great. Now, if you see the picture of Krishna, you'll see him just like a boy of 22, 25 years old. He was so beautiful. Then, that is the sign of God. So although Satsvarup Maharaj had started describing the March 4th class, he went back to March 2nd because so many interesting points Prabhupada gave in these early classes. Although the audience had never even seen a picture of Krishna, he was spoon-feeding them. Who is Krishna? Who is God? Who am I? Through the teachings of Bhagavad-Gita. Prabhupada's voice fades as he pauses, looking out at his audience. No one had ever seen Krishna. None of them have the slightest previous knowledge of Lord Krishna. In India, hundreds of millions worship Lord Krishna daily as the eternal form of all beauty and truth, and view his graceful form in sculpture, painting, and dance. His philosophical teachings in Bhagavad-Gita are all famous, and Prabhupada is his intimate emissary. Yet the ladies and gentlemen in room 307 look back at Swami blankly. So Prabhupada, he sometimes explained that if you take music lessons, if you've never had a music lesson before, then the cost of the lesson is not very expensive. But if you've had music lessons before, because the teacher has to untrain you and then retrain you, that means double the work, so they charge double the amount. So this was the advantage of Prabhupada preaching in the Western countries. Nobody knew who Krishna was. And therefore, whatever he said about Krishna, they accepted very easily. Because we all grew up at this time when Prabhupada came. I had never heard of Krishna. One time, while reading the dictionary with my mother, there was a picture of a cart. It was a Jagannath Rathayatra cart in the dictionary. And the name was, the word in the dictionary was Juggernaut. Because the English, they saw this Jagannath festival that was going on in Puri. And they saw that the people coming by the millions from all over India, some of them were so exuberant with ecstatic love, they would throw themselves under the wheels of the cart and commit suicide. That even happened, Sanatana Goswami was contemplating doing that at the time of Lord Chaitanya. So the British, they considered these barbarian natives of India to be just fanatic, worshipping their gods and committing suicide in front of them, these idols, which was completely unacceptable in Christianity. So they construed this word juggernaut to mean when some crazy thing is going on and people are dying in the frenzy and things like that. That was the most we ever heard of Krishna, Jagannath, Ram, anything. Just the perverted reflections of how the English saw the Indians. And now Prabhupada coming with the pure message of Krishna consciousness, and his students were sitting there ready to accept anything that he said because they didn't know anything else. And that was the great advantage. And that was how the young people in New York City and later all over the world could easily accept Krishna consciousness because they didn't know anything else. They weren't contaminated with Mayavadi philosophy. They didn't know about different sects and different sampradayas and the arguments between the philosophies and things like that. They just knew what Prabhupada was teaching them, and they accepted what he said wholeheartedly. Prabhupada is discussing the real meaning. Oh, now, at the beginning of this chapter, Satsuru Maharaj took out one of the quotations. It was a conversation here from the March 4th class. Because some of the women from Dr. Mishra's classes, they were a little argumentative because they were contaminated with this Mayavad philosophy. They thought they knew something. So in the middle of the classes, they would interrupt Prabhupada, have him explain things better. Even the editor who Prabhupada wanted to edit his Bhagavad-Gita, we heard, Mrs. LeBlanc, she refused to edit it because it did not contain Mayavad philosophy. So these people who were listening to Prabhupada's classes, they were not, at this time, because they were Dr. Mishra's students, they had the contamination of Mayavad. So Prabhupada, in his March 4th class, let's see what I have here. Yes. He was explaining who is Krishna. Prabhupada is discussing the real meaning of going to a sacred place in India. This is what Prabhupada says. One should go to a sacred place in order to find some intelligent scholar in spiritual knowledge living there and make association with him. Just like my residence is at Vrindavan. So at Vrindavan, there are many big scholars and saintly persons living. So one should go to such holy places, not simply to take bath in the water. One must be intelligent enough to find some spiritually advanced man living there and take instruction from him and be benefited by that. If a man has attachment for going to a place of pilgrimage to take a bath, but has no attraction for hearing from learned people there, he is considered to be an ass. So the whole civilization is moving like a civilization of cows and asses. And that's because Srila Prabhupada, in this lecture, he quoted this sloka from Canto 10, chapter 84, verse 13. Yasyatma buddhir kunape tridatuke, svadi kalatradishu bhoma ishyadhi, yatirtha buddhi shalile nakarhichij, janesh abigeshu saeva go kara. Go means cows and kara means asses, donkeys. So the point that Prabhupada made that Satsuru Maharaj didn't include was, in all different religions, there are places of pilgrimage, just as the Hajj is going on now in Mecca. And it's one of the 5 basic principles that every Muslim must, if they have the financial ability, must visit Mecca in their lifetime. So they all go to that place of pilgrimage. And this year, because of the extreme heat wave, hundreds and hundreds of people died because of not being taken care of properly. So this is, again, that religious fervor, not only in Christianity, in Mohammed, in all the different religions, there's a fervor because there is some love of God. So Prabhupada in this lecture, he gave the example of the Jordan River. The Jordan River is in Palestine, it's maybe it's in Israel, I don't know exactly where it is, but it's very holy to the Jews and the Christians. So their place of pilgrimage, there was a big crusade in the Middle Ages coming from Europe. All the European Christians, they wanted to come and take over that whole area because that was where Jesus Christ and that was where Moses, all of the biblical pastimes took place there. It was their holy place. But if Prabhupada was making the point, if you just go to the Jordan, if you just go to any holy place, just to bathe in the water, to put your head in the water where the baptism took place, things like that, then you're no better than a cow and an ass. The real purpose of holy places is to hear from the saints and the sages who live in those holy places. So Srila Prabhupada, coming up next month, Prabhupada was here with us in 1974 during the first month of Chaturmas. So Prabhupada was explaining, he chose to lecture from the part of the Srimad Bhagavatam when Narada Muni, he had the opportunity to associate with the Bhaktivedantas when they stayed in the ashram where his mother served for the Chaturmas. And Prabhupada was explaining the importance of staying in a holy place, specifically Vrindavan, during Chaturmas, because then you get the opportunity to associate with saintly persons who are not doing their itinerant preaching at that time, because we know in a few days the rains are going to start. When the rains start, it becomes almost impossible to travel, especially in the early days before airplanes and things like that. So the saintly people, they come to holy places. So at this time, 1966 in America, there were 2 holy places, 2 places of pilgrimage in America. And as a youth, those 2 places were Greenwich Village in New York City and Haight-Ashbury in California. For the youth, these were the holy places. Holy places because it was a congregation of many youth going to these 2 places on the East Coast and the West Coast to inquire about self-realization, about Eastern philosophies, about mysticism. So all of us youth, we would congregate to those 2 places. My brother lived just a block away from where all of this was going on, where Prabhupada had his place. So all the youth on the East Coast, those who were looking for something more than just materialistic life, they would go to Greenwich Village. And Greenwich Village is right next to Lower East Side, where Prabhupada had his 26 Second Avenue and the Bowery. It's all walking distance. And that's where all the youth lived. So when some of these young students who were attending Dr. Mishra's classes started attending Prabhupada's personal classes in room 307, they came down to tell all of the young people in Greenwich Village that, hey, there's a Swami here. He's teaching Bhagavad-Gita. You should all come. So this particular chapter is when these young people start bringing the youth to Prabhupada. And then these youth convince Prabhupada that you don't belong up here in Uptown, where all these stuffy old ladies are. You come down where the young people are. And Prabhupada, it was a risk. So Prabhupada was explaining to these people, and now we'll go on, how they responded when Prabhupada was talking about holy places, how you should seek out a saintly person. So, a woman says, one must be intelligent. Yes, one is no better than a civilization of cows and asses. Everyone is identifying with the body. Yes, you want to speak? One lady is interested. In the places known as secret places, sacred, yes. Woman, is it sacred places? Yes. Isn't it also a fact that there is more magnetism because of the meeting of saints and more advanced people? Prabhupada, oh yes, certainly, certainly. Therefore, the place itself has got some magnetism. Woman, yes, and when Prabhupada, just like at Vrindavan, that is practical. Here I am now sitting in New York, the world's greatest city, such a magnificent city. But my heart is always hankering after that Vrindavan. So that was the quote that Satsvarup Maharaj started this chapter with, if you remember. Woman, yes, and she laughs. Prabhupada, yes, and I am not happy here. Woman, yes, I know. Prabhupada, I shall be very happy to return to my Vrindavan, that sacred place. But then, why are you here? Now, because it is my duty. I have brought some message for you people, because I have been ordered by my superior, my spiritual master. Whatever you have learned, you should go to the Western countries, and you must distribute this knowledge. So in spite of all my difficulties, all my inconveniences, I am here, because I am obligated by duty. If I go and sit down in Vrindavan, that will be good for my personal conveniences. I shall be very comfortable there, and I will have no anxiety, nothing of the sort. But I have taken all the risk in this old age, because I am duty-bound. I am duty-bound. So I have to execute my duty, despite all my inconveniences. So here was Prabhupada sitting in this little room. It was 7 feet wide by 15 feet long. Prabhupada was sitting behind his trunk. In those days, we used metal trunks, using that as a desk. And all the students were sitting on the bare floor on the other side of the trunk. And he was explaining why he had come, why he had left the holy place of Vrindavan. So when one goes out, of course, we're all here now in Vrindavan, hopefully all by the blessings of our spiritual masters. We've been sent here to assist Prabhupada in his project here, because this was Prabhupada's phase 2 of ISKCON. After Prabhupada had he had planted the seed and the roots had begun to spread all over the world, Prabhupada's phase 2 was to bring Krishna consciousness back to India. And he wanted everyone to India and get the advantage of coming to the holy places, hearing from the saintly devotees there, and then going back out and preaching again. So the maintenance of the holy places here in Vrindavan, and all of Prabhupada's temples have become like holy places, are very important. That's why we're very honored, and we're very much blessed to be able to serve in Vrindavan. But Srila Prabhupada, I had this example with Prabhupada here, just before Srila Prabhupada was going to leave us. He told me he was leaving. He couldn't sit here anymore, although he couldn't walk, he couldn't eat for 6 months. He wanted to go preach again. And he specifically wanted to go to his newest project, which at that time was called New Varsana. After the name of New Varsana, Prabhupada changed the name of that to Gita Nagari, because Prabhupada felt that his mission had only been 50% complete, because he had not yet set up the Varnashram Dharma, or self-sufficiency within the community. So his goal, this was in August 1977, was he wanted to go to Gita Nagari, and he wanted to establish Varnashram there with self-sufficiency farming. So Prabhupada told me at that time, he said to go there also, to Gita Nagari, and I could cook for him there because he was planning to go there. So, of course, no one likes to leave Vrindavan. Even when the court case was going on, same time, 1977, the temple president of New York, Adi Keshav Swami, came. And he said, Prabhupada, I have to go back now to New York because the case is going on. I have to go to the court and win this case for you. This was the kidnapping case. And Prabhupada said to Adi Keshav Swami at that time, he said, yes, none of us ever wanted to leave Vrindavan, but somehow we have all fallen away. So none of us ever want to leave our service here in Vrindavan. But for the purpose of preaching, and especially when we get the order of the spiritual master, we're obliged to leave Vrindavan just as Prabhupada left Vrindavan. So on Prabhupada's order, I went to Gita Nagari. Prabhupada couldn't go because he became too sick, but I still felt it was my duty to do what Prabhupada said. I went there. And when I went there and I saw what Prabhupada's vision was for the society to set up these self-sufficiency communities so that the brahmacharis, grihastas, vanaprasthas, sannyasis could all live by tilling by making our own food, making our own houses, simple living and high thinking. So going to Gita Nagari at that time, having left Vrindavan and going there just as Prabhupada had done, on the order of Srila Prabhupada, I just cried when I reached there. Because when you do something on the order of your spiritual master, it's not necessarily what you want to do. It's what he wants you to do for preaching purposes. And when I saw what a massive job it was going to be for us to set up this self-sufficiency, for us to set up the farms, because Western people they're not used to living on farms and plowing and taking care of cows. Even today, most people, they're sitting behind their computers all day. If you ask them to plow the field, they can't do it. But Prabhupada wanted us to do that. He wanted us to have these eco farms. He wanted us to take care of the cows. And that was Prabhupada's next mission. After he had set up in the Western countries, he had then set up in India so successfully. Then he wanted us to set up these communities, these farm communities, so we could live according to the Vedas, the way the Brijbasis lived. So the point is, when you carry out the order of your spiritual master, it's not what we want to do. It's what he wants to do, what our spiritual master wants us to do to carry out his mission. And this is what Prabhupada was explaining to these new students, that I'm not happy here. I don't want to be here. I am here as a matter of duty to teach all of you who are completely ignorant of Krishna, who Krishna is, and what the teachings of Bhagavad-Gita is. So I have to execute my duty, despite all my inconveniences. This was Prabhupada's answer to the lady's question. Then an outsider opens the door and hesitantly glances inside. Prabhupada stopping his lecture. Yes, yes, come in. You can come here. So the people were coming one by one. Either they had met Prabhupada at Dr. Mishra's, or their friends had told their friends, and they were coming to find Srila Prabhupada in his little room. So these are the different lectures that Prabhupada now gave in April. We're not up to that yet. But Prabhupada was continuing through. We saw in March, he went through, and then we heard that from March 11th to 25th, not many people were coming, so he wasn't recording the lectures, although he was still giving the classes. And then in April, Prabhupada continued with the second chapter, because second chapter, as Prabhupada entitled in the Bhagavad-Gita, is Contents of the Gita Summarized. So Sri Krishna gives the summary of the entire philosophy of Bhagavad-Gita in that second chapter. So that was where Prabhupada started his classes. Now, we have here, Satsvarupa Maharaj has introduced one of Prabhupada's students, and he writes, it's 4 pages long. I'm going to read it. And then later, this same section was taken out and elaborated in the 1979 issue of Back to Godhead magazine. These are some of the pictures of Prabhupada at this time. This is the new group, the young people who were coming to meet Prabhupada. So I'll first read what Satsvarupa Maharaj has taken out from the larger article in the Back to Godhead magazine, so we understand. It's like Prabhupada explains that when you're cooking, if you're cooking rice, and you want to know if the rice is finished, you just pick up 1 grain of rice and you feel it. And if that grain of rice is soft, then you know the whole pot is ready. So this is what Satsvarupa Maharaj has done here. He's taken one of the students and given a microscopic description of that student's relationship with Prabhupada, so that we could understand how all these students were trying in their own way, although they had so little knowledge, they were trying to help Prabhupada and learn from Prabhupada. So this is about a young man named Robert Nelson. Robert Nelson was like a slow, simple country boy with a homespun manner, even though he had grown up in New York City. He was 20 years old. He wasn't part of the growing hippie movement, and he didn't take marijuana or other drugs, and he didn't socialize much. He was a loner. He had gotten some technical education at Staten Island Community College. Staten Island is, they're called boroughs. Here we call them suburbs, bungars, different sections. So there's Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, and there's an island called Staten Island, and that was where a lot of the poorer people lived. So this is where Robert Nelson had done his studies and had tried his hand at the record manufacturing business, but without much success. He was interested in God and would attend various spiritual meetings around the city. So one night he wandered into the Yoga Society to hear Dr. Mishra's lecture, and there he saw Prabhupada for the first time. Robert explains. Swami was sitting cross-legged on a bench. There was a meeting, and Dr. Mishra was standing up before a group of people. There were about 50 people coming there, and he talked on I am consciousness. Dr. Mishra talked and then gave Swami a grand introduction with a big smile. "Swamiji is here," he said, and he swings around and waves his hand for a big introduction. It was beautiful. This was after Dr. Mishra spoke for about an hour. The Swami didn't speak. He sang a song. Afterward, I went up to him. He had a big smile, and he said that he likes young people to take to Krishna consciousness. He was very serious about it. He wanted all young people. So I thought that was very nice. It made sense. So I wanted to help. We stood there talking for about an hour. Mishra had a library in the back, and we looked at certain books, Arjun, Krishna, chariots, and things. And then we walked around. We looked at some of the pictures of Swamis on the wall. By that time it was getting very late, and Prabhupada said come back the next day at 10 to his office downstairs. The next day, when Robert Nelson went to room 307, Prabhupada invited him in. The room was clearly not intended to serve as a living quarters. There was no toilet. Oh, can you imagine? Shower, chair, bed, or telephone. The walls were painted a dark, dismal color. Prabhupada showed Robert the 3-volume set of Srimad Bhagavatam. Can you imagine living in a room without a toilet? How Prabhupada suffered. 3-volume set of Srimad Bhagavatam, which Robert purchased for $16.50. Prabhupada gave him a discount. Usually it was $20. Then Prabhupada handed him a small piece of paper with the Hare Krishna mantra printed on it. Robert says, while Swamiji was handing it to me, he had this big smile on his face, like he was handing me the world. We spent the whole day together. At one point, he said, "We are going to take a sleep." So he lay down by his little desk, and so I said, "I am tired too." So I lay down at the other end of the room, and we rested. I just lay on the floor. It was the only place to do it. But he didn't rest that long, an hour and a half, I think, and we spent the rest of the day together. He was talking about Lord Chaitanya and the Lord's pastimes, and he showed me a small picture of Lord Chaitanya. Then he started talking about the devotees of Lord Chaitanya, Nityananda and Advaita. He had a picture of the 5 of them and a picture of his spiritual master. He said some things in Sanskrit, and then he translated. It wasn't much of a room, though. You'd really be disappointed if you saw it. Robert Nelson couldn't give Prabhupada the kind of assistance he needed. Lord Chaitanya states that a person has at his command 4 assets: his life, money, intelligence, and words, at least one of which he should give to the service of God. Robert Nelson did not seem able to give his whole life to Krishna consciousness, and as for money, he had very little. His intelligence was also limited, and he spoke unimpressively, nor did he have a wide range of friends or contacts among whom to speak. But he was affectionate with toward the Swami, and out of the 8 million people in the city, he was practically the only one who showed personal interest in him and offered to help. So that was what Satsrup Maharaj had to say about Robert. And we'll look here. This is what Prabhupada has to say about Robert. This relationship started in February, when Prabhupada had just recently moved to his room 307. One young man came from downtown, Mr. Robert. The Sankirtan record was played. He liked it. This is when Prabhupada didn't have any water, his sink, the plumber didn't show up. Then, a month later, March 24th, there was meeting today. 3 ladies and 3 gentlemen besides the captain and his wife attended the meeting. Mr. Robert brought some fruits and grains for me. So you see, within that 1 month, the relationship developed to the point where Robert, he realized, I should bring something. He's my teacher. He's giving me something. And then Tuesday, it is Lord Chaitanya's grace that Robert today brought me an old typewriter. So this was after Prabhupada's typewriter had been stolen. So we're seeing here, as Satsrup Maharaj says, at this point Robert was the only person out of 8 million people in New York who were helping Prabhupada. And we could see from Prabhupada's description in his diary what advancement he was making. From giving fruits and grains, he brought Prabhupada a typewriter. And then this is in May. In the afternoon, Mr. Robert Nelson came to see me. I requested him to become a member of the association. Just a minute. Yes. He agreed and paid $20 for the month of June 1966. This is deposited in the bank. So here's a little success. 1 person, 1 grain of rice. We're seeing. This is how Prabhupada is cultivating. From February to May, now Robert has become a member of his International Association for what Prabhupada called God Consciousness at this time, because it wasn't incorporated. So, we'll go on with what Satsrup Maharaj is explaining from his viewpoint about Robert's development. From his experience in the record business, Mr. Robert, as Swamiji called him, developed a scheme to produce a record of Swamiji singing. People were always putting out albums with almost anything on them, he explained, and they would always make money, or at least break even, so it would be almost impossible to lose money. It was a way he thought he could help make the Swami known. And he tried to convince Prabhupada of the idea. And Prabhupada didn't discourage Mr. Robert, who seemed eager to render this service. Robert says, me and the Swami went around to this record company on 46th Street. We went there and I started talking. And the man was all business. He was all business and mean. They go together. So we went in there with a tape and we tried talking to the man. Swami was talking, but the man said he couldn't put the tape out. I think he listened to the tape, but he wouldn't put it out. So we felt discouraged, but he didn't say much about it. Now, Satsrup Maharaj explains, Prabhupada had been in business in India, and he wasn't about to think that he could suddenly take up business in a foreign country on the advice of a young boy in New York City. Besides, he had come not to do business, but to preach. Robert, however, was enthusiastically offering service. Perhaps he wouldn't become a regular brahmachari student, but he had a desire to serve Krishna. For Prabhupada to refuse him would be perhaps to turn away an interested Western young person. Prabhupada had come to speak about Krishna, to present the chanting, and if Mr. Robert wanted to help by arranging for an American record album, then that was welcome. Now eventually, when Prabhupada came to 26 2nd Avenue, a record was produced. And it was that record that George Harrison heard. And George Harrison, when the devotees went to London, and Shyam Sundar found out a way to meet George Harrison was so happy to meet Shyam Sundar, he said, I've been looking for you guys. Where have you been? I have your record. So this, because in those days we didn't have media like we have now. We had record players. Record players, they're these big records, this big, round, and there was a needle, and the record would go around, It was a big part of our life, because music is very important in human life. When I graduated from high school, my big high school graduation present was a record player, because it was the way we communicated, through records in those days. And this record used to be played on the radios, and this gave Prabhupada some publicity when the record was finally made. So Robert had the right idea, but the time wasn't ready yet. And he didn't have the expertise to get this printed. Maybe he went to the wrong people, whatever it was, but he was trying his best, and Prabhupada didn't want to encourage him. Now, and Prabhupada knew, he said he did not come to do business. He did not come to beg from the Americans, as Indira Gandhi, we had heard, had done. He had come to teach. So he wasn't interested in making money from the record sales. In fact, the record sales became so big at one point, not in America, but in Europe. Hansaduta and his Hansaduta, and then later Hari Kesh, instead of distributing books, they just started to distribute records, because records were so popular with the youth. And Prabhupada stopped it. He said, we're not interested in record distribution. They'll listen to the record once and then they'll forget it. We're interested in book distribution. So although this record distribution was attracting a lot of the youth, Prabhupada was not in favor of it. He wanted his books distributed because if anyone just touched his books, they would get purified. If they read one line, one word, one paragraph, they could perfect their life. So Prabhupada knew, although he did not want to discourage Robert. So, Robert wanted to help by arranging for an American record album, then that was welcome. Mr. Robert and the Swami made an odd combination. Prabhupada was elderly and dignified, a deep scholar of the Bhagavatam and the Sanskrit language, whereas Robert Nelson was artless, even in Western culture, and inept in worldly ways. Together they would walk, the Swami wearing his winter coat. Someone had given him a winter coat and it had an imitation fur collar on it. But probably he had nothing, so he accepted it. His Indian dhoti and white pointed shoes. Mr. Robert wearing old khaki pants and an old coat. Prabhupada walked with rapid, determined strides. Even Prabhupada's disciples would have to run to catch up with Prabhupada when he would take his morning walks, outpacing the lumbering, rambling, heavy-set boy who had befriended him. Mr. Robert was supposed to help Prabhupada in making presentations to businessmen and real estate men, yet he himself was hardly a slick fellow. He was innocent. Here's Robert speaking. Once we went over to this big office building on 42nd Street, and we went in there. 42nd Street is the heart of the center of New York City in Manhattan, 42nd and 5th Street. That was where the New York Library was that we read about. And then if you go along 42nd Street further, you come to Times Square, which is a highly degenerate, it's where the movies are and where all the prostitutes are, and there's a lot of nightlife there. But 42nd Street is like the center of the city. Prabhupada wanted a temple there, of course. Once we went over to this big office building on 42nd Street, and we went in there. The rent was thousands of dollars for a whole floor. So I was standing there talking to the man, but I didn't understand how all this money would come. The Swami wanted a big place, and I didn't know what to tell the man. Prabhupada didn't have any money. Prabhupada wanted a big place, and a big place meant a big price. He had no money, and Robert Nelson had only his unemployment checks. In America, if you had a job and you lost your job, the welfare department would give you $100, $200 a month for free. You'd have to stand in line, And every month you would get some money so that you wouldn't become a homeless vagrant. So that was what Robert was living on, his unemployment checks. He didn't even have a job. Still, Prabhupada was interested. If he were to find a building, it would be a great step in his mission. And this was also another way of engaging Mr. Robert. Besides, Krishna might do anything, give anything, or work in any way, ordinary or miraculous. So Prabhupada had his reasoning, and Mr. Robert had his. So Prabhupada's reasoning was that Krishna can do anything, and Mr. Robert's reasoning was that I want to try to help this Swami any way I can. Robert, the building was between 6th and Broadway on 42nd Street. It's the center of the center of New York City. Some place to open Krishna's temple, he says. We went in and up to the 2nd floor and saw the renting agent, and then we left. I think it was $5,000 a month or $10,000 a month. Prabhupada was paying $70 a month at this time. We got to a certain point, and the money was too much, and then we left. When he brought up the prices, I figured we had better not. We had to stop. On another occasion, Robert Nelson took Prabhupada by bus to the Hotel Columbia at 70 West 46th Street. The hotel had a suite that Prabhupada looked at for possible use as a temple. But again, it was very expensive and there was no money. So Prabhupada, Prabhupada's secretary, Shyam Sundar, he wrote, it's now 3 volumes, book called Chasing Rhinos with the Swami. So actually, he changed the name because Prabhupada's expression was shoot for the rhinoceros, not chase the rhinoceros, shoot for the, because here in India, we have rhinoceros. And it's very hard because rhinoceros have built-in armor on their body and these big horns, you can't even get near rhinoceros. So if you happen to shoot a rhinoceros, it's a great accomplishment. Of course, Prabhupada would never shoot. It's an expression. Shoot for the, if you're going to shoot something, shoot for the hardest thing to shoot for. And then I would say, oh, he got a rhinoceros because it was something that people just can't do. Because the rhinoceros, he'll come and attack you and you're dead before you even get to shoot him. So Prabhupada's expression was shoot for the rhinoceros, not chase the rhinoceros. So here we have an example of Prabhupada shooting for the rhinoceros. He was going for these suites in the center of Manhattan, $10,000 a month for a whole floor. And what did Prabhupada get? Here's what Prabhupada got. Prabhupada explained it later in 1976. He was visiting Tehran, that's in Iran, a purely Muslim country. He had sent the devotees there. One Tehran Iranian devotee joined in New York City, and Prabhupada initiated him as Atreya Rishi. And he was an accountant, very hi-fi job he had, but he lived very simply. He married a devotee, Vaidhi Bhakti Devi Dasi, in New York Temple. And Prabhupada sent him back to Tehran to open a temple. And it was a purely Muslim country. So rather than open a temple, they opened a vegetarian restaurant, which was very smart. And they had a lot of success because the people were interested in coming to the restaurant. And gradually they were translating books in Farsi language. And they were getting a following. So Prabhupada made 2 trips to Iran. So at a room conversation, Prabhupada was speaking to the devotees there. Other devotees went there, Manjari and Navayovana. They were also from New York Temple. Because this was, Prabhupada, he told the devotees that anyone who goes to a Muslim country to preach, I will put their feet on my head. That was how much Prabhupada wanted this Krishna consciousness to be spread. So Manjari and Navayovana went, and Dayananda and Nandarani went. They all wanted to get Prabhupada's mercy, so they went to Tehran. And then Prabhupada was visiting. And he said, I was living in the Bowery Street, because this is a time when Prabhupada was going back and forth between his room 307, and then he would go stay with Mr. Paul on the Bowery. And on my door, these bums were lying with urine and wine bottles and everything. Still, they were so respectful. When I'll come, the bums would say to Prabhupada, yes, you can enter, please come. I had no quarrel with them. They were very kind. They welcomed me. They opened the door. Please go. They also knew that he's a harmless man. So, platform, if you remain on the spiritual platform, this material condition cannot hamper you. Ahaituki apratiyata. So, we can't imagine Prabhupada's challenges, Prabhupada's struggles. He'd have to step over these drunkards who were lying on his doorstep, and they would move aside for Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said that these people were so, it's described later, they were so degraded and so penniless. They would just beg, they would go on the streets and they would say, you got any spare change? And people would give them a nickel, a quarter, and they'd take that immediately, go to the wine shops, go to the bars, and because they were addicted to drinking. And they had nowhere to stay, so they would sleep on the staircase where Prabhupada lived, and make way when Prabhupada walked by. And at night, the other drunkards would go through the other people who were sleeping, go through their pockets up to 20 times a night. They would get their pockets picked. They would all live off of each other's, stealing from each other. So this is where Prabhupada had, where he was preaching. And the young people would go up 4 flights of steps to where Prabhupada was saying, imagine Prabhupada would have to walk 4 flights of steps to get to his room. All right. Sometimes Robert would make purchases for Prabhupada with the money from his unemployment checks. Once he bought orange-colored t-shirts. Once he went to Woolworth's and bought kitchen pots and pans and some picture frames for Prabhupada's pictures of Lord Chaitanya and his spiritual master. So that's bhakti. He had nothing. He was unemployed, and he was using his unemployment money to buy things for Prabhupada. Robert, one time I wanted to know how to make chapati cakes. So Swami said, $100 please, for the recipe. $100 please. So I went and got some money, but I couldn't get $100, but he showed me anyway. He taught me to cook and would always repeat, wash hands, and you should only eat with your right hand. And whoever met the Swami was almost always impressed. They would start smiling back to him, and sometimes they would say funny things to each other that were nice. The Swami's English was very technical, always. I mean, he had a big vocabulary, but sometimes people had a little trouble understanding him, and you had to help sometimes. So this is the 4-page description of Robert Nelson, and then this later, this Back to Godhead. Now we only have 2 minutes, so we won't read this. We can read it next week. And after this, we're going to a new section now, because Prabhupada, we had heard about Harvey Cohen, and Harvey Cohen, he had also written an article in the early Back to Godhead magazines, 1966, about how he met Prabhupada, and how Harvey decided to go to California because his friends had become drug addicts, and he wanted a pure life. So he said, I'm not going to get it here in New York because it's so degraded here. So he left his loft, and that was where Prabhupada stayed. And he invited Prabhupada to stay there. And he went to California. And Prabhupada gives that as an example in March 4th. He said, if you want to go someplace, you have to hear about the place from people who have been there, and you have to make plans how to go there. So in his description of you're not this body, he said you have two bodies, you have the gross body, you have the subtle body. The gross body dies. The subtle body goes with you and it takes you to wherever you're thinking because of the mind body and the false ego. So then Prabhupada explains in his March 4th lecture that this subtle body, if I want to go to where Krishna is, we have to study about that place. And then he gave the Chintamani Prakara Sadmasu as a beginning, just to introduce his audience that if one wants to go to the spiritual world, even if one wants to go to the moon, you have to study the place and you have to prepare your body for that place. So Prabhupada was gradually introducing to these people who were a blank slate, and therefore he was able to give them the proper knowledge by which they could eventually go back to Godhead. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
What happened to Mr. Robert? Did he?
We'll read as we go on, because now it's going chronologically again. So.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Can I see the conversation where he talks about the magnanimity of the place?
The what? Yes, of course.
I tried to find last Saturday.
Can I put this for you?
What
This
is
is Radha Gunjal. Radha Gunjal.
Radha?
Radha Gunjal. Nanpriya gave me. Mata, did you happen to give this class?
Yes. Can you take a picture of that?
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
good.
when was
Yes,
this class?
it was for an engineering, 50 engineering students
Is
came
it
from.
recorded?
I don't know, I have no idea.
I didn't know what this class is. It would have been nice for me to know these when you discuss. Because
That's why I asked you which class, because I thought maybe you were sitting in that class or something.
Oh.
It was just yesterday morning.
I saw it. I thought this is your handwriting.
Yeah. You can read the whole transcript, lecture, and the conversation in Vedabase. Okay, 1966, March 2nd.
This is just, it's the same, it's in volume, it's the same Lilamrita which the red color was before, in one big.
Yeah, they combined it all
Okay, that's the same.
later.
Well, the second question is, many times devotees they ask, like, what was the conversation between you and Prabhupada about Gita Nagari? The remaining 50%, you know. So people
No, that was Prabhupada's plan to begin this.
So is it mentioned somewhere? Is it written somewhere? Put in a written somewhere?
Yes, Prabhupada wrote many articles about his Gita Nagari concept in his original Back to Godhead magazines.
Yes, I have that collection.
You have that? Yeah, so that was what it was.
I want to know exactly the words if he mentioned that yes, my 50% work is...
Oh, that, he didn't mention that to me personally, but I can look it up for you later. You know, do you have the portfolio, the archives?
I have access, but I don't have personally because I'm not into, I don't keep any computer.
Oh, you don't have it? Oh,
But
that's
I
nice.
have access with...
Okay. Well, you can, on your phone, you just do vedabase.com.
Okay.
You know that, and that will come there. I'll look it up, but, and then I'll tell you the exact time and place that he said it, okay?
Because devotees have always this question, you know, when
And where did, yes,
that
yes.
50% work is remaining and
Yes, right. We hear it many times. Right.
Okay, Mataji, thank you.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. You have a question?
Yes, Mataji.
Okay, what's it?
जी एक्चुअली ना अभी तक मेरा साधना अच्छे से नहीं हो रहा है. I need guidance.
Well, where do you live?
In Ramakrishna Mission State.
Oh, okay.
We are from
Yeah,
Varanasi.
yeah.
He's
Is
my son.
your elder son, huh? Right. Very nice. So how is your job?
Going on.
It started now, yeah? Good.
But it's the working time is too high, Mataji. It's 7 o'clock says evening 6:30.
Oh, they really work you hard. They work
4:30
you
the work
hard.
has to be finished. The duty should be finished, but
They continue. Oh,
till 6:30.
and you're the superintendent, so you have more work. You can't expect to have very good sadhana then. And how are they eating? You have to cook
We are
or...
managing, Mataji. We are not preparing properly, but by dahi chawal or something simple
Well,
recipe.
they can take it to temple, and they can get a tiffin for you.
But for that they need the pass. Every time
No, you don't need a pass. It's free.
they can't take the parcel. They can eat there.
They can eat there. Oh, you mean for a tiffin